Let's talk dialogue. In a story, dialogue is very important, but it's not dialogue like you would imagine if you are just conversing with one of your friends, right? One way to kind of pick up on the nuances of dialogue is to listen to conversations around you, though. So, say you're at the coffee shop and you walk in and you hear the clerk talking to the customer. You can pick up on some of those nuances on how they converse about what the customer is ordering. Or say you're on the phone with your homegirl and you're just shooting the shit. What are some things that you guys might say? What are some things that are important to that conversation? Well, to start, you probably start a conversation with hello, a little small talk, ask them how they're doing, little small details that may or may not matter. And one way to think about that is if you get a call from someone that you haven't talked to in a very long time and you're wondering, why exactly are they calling me? And you're hoping, I hope they get to the point. Like, get us there. What exactly did you want when you called? That what did you want when you called piece is important to dialogue in a story. We don't want to start with all the small details, the flowery, how are you doing? Hello, how's your day? How's the weather? How's your mom and them? We don't need all that. We want to get to the meat of the conversation. Drop your readers into the middle of it, the part that actually matters. And as you want to leave out the beginning parts, the hey, how you doing? How you been? You also want to leave out the ending. Goodbye, have a great day, see you later, talk to you later, bye, talk to you next week. All that jazz, leave it out. That middle part, the part that tells you why the person is calling or why the conversation is important, that's the piece you want to highlight in your dialogue. Another note, you don't want to have dialogue that is only dialogue. You want some thoughts in the middle. You want some setting interspersed in there. You want some details of what's going on around the characters who are having a conversation. So, for instance, if you say, last week he went out to the club and can you believe he came back at 2 a.m? What is that character thinking when she's telling her homegirl that? She's probably thinking, I don't know. I can't tell her that I think he's cheating because I told her that last month and she told me to leave him, and I don't want to tell her that again because she'll probably tell me the same exact response. That's just a bizarro example I just came up with. But whatever it is your character is thinking in their head, in the middle of that dialogue as they're conversing with the other characters, put that in there. Weave that into the dialogue. There should never be more than 4 or 5 lines of dialogue of back and forth between the characters before it gets a little bit tiring for the reader. You want to give them some variety, something else to read as they're digesting that dialogue. But always remember, strong dialogue moves the story forward. So if at the end of that conversation, there really isn't any new nuggets that the reader is picking up from that dialogue, it may be unnecessary. You may be able to cut it out. Obviously, dialogue is also important to kind of give the character some of their personality. So sometimes you could have some wish-wash dialogue that will kind of heighten the personality of your character. Certain phrases that they say, ways that they converse with their friends, things that they talk about when they aren't with the other main character, etc. And they aren't delivering very important information. Some of that can be a way to describe your character, can give your character some depth. But if it becomes, every chapter you have some of that, it may be unnecessary and you may be able to alleviate that. So you may want to cut that out. Remember, good dialogue should have purpose. It should move the story forward. It shouldn't repeat information across scenes. So for instance, if in the first scene we see the character has called her homegirl to say that he stayed out too late, the next time we have a scene between the characters, we shouldn't be revisiting what happened in the dialogue, or we shouldn't be regurgitating in the dialogue what happened in a previous scene, unless it's going to move the story forward, unless she's going to take the advice of her girlfriend and actually pick a fight with her boyfriend, or somehow that tension is going to be resolved with her boyfriend in a future scene through the dialogue that she's talking about with her girlfriend. And the dialogue should have an outcome. When the reader gets to the end of that dialogue, they should know, like, oh, this is what might happen next. They should feel like, okay, I learned something here. I picked up something that I can put in my toolkit to keep moving forward. Or I am now curious about something that will make me turn the page so I can find out what happens next. For instance, between the two girlfriends, they have this whole conversation about the boyfriend staying out too late. And now the main character has said that they don't typically take their girlfriend's advice. And now they're going to go meet with their boyfriend and have a discussion. You kind of know now, like, well, is she going to take the advice of her girlfriend when she meets with him? Or is she going to ignore him? That's a question that now the reader needs to turn the page to find out what's going to happen. So now that'll keep them moving forward. That will keep the story progressing. But at the end of the conversation, she's like, that was nice. I'm not going to talk to him. Have a great day. I'll call you next week. Whatever. It doesn't really interest the reader to keep moving because they already know. Like the character is telling them, I'm not going to do what you said. And keep it moving. So the reader is not all that intrigued to keep moving on because in the dialogue, you gave them all the information they needed. You want to have some sort of outcome that will also intrigue the reader enough to keep them reading. Another thing to make sure you're doing in your dialogue is giving your dialogue tags. So in the dialogue, you want to make sure the reader knows exactly who is speaking. And I will admit, this is hard for me. I have taken some courses to figure out like how I can interweave the dialogue so it doesn't make it where we're always saying he said, she said, he said, she said, Veronica said, Bill said, Tim said. You have to make sure that it isn't redundant, right? Your dialogue tags aren't redundant. And by some ways to break that up is to give the character action. So, such and such Veronica shook her head before they actually said that line of dialogue, or Bill is walking across the room before he says that piece of dialogue. That way you can avoid saying he said or she said because you have some action along the way before you introduce the dialogue or even afterwards. Another thing is making sure you include some body language. What is that person doing as they are saying whatever it is that they're saying? Because one thing you'll notice, even in everyday conversation, especially if you're in person with someone, if someone smiles, they may be delivering a piece of dialogue that doesn't elicit a smile, but it kind of warms the words up a little bit. It doesn't make them have that punch if they were mean mugging you as they said it. So make sure you include some body language so that also adds in some depth to what the person is saying. So the reader can kind of intuitively say, oh, okay, they didn't actually mean what they said and how they said it because they're smiling when they said it. Or they have a blank stare when they said it. So maybe they don't quite know what's going on with the other character. It differs from what they're saying. Or, yep, that confirms what I thought because what they said aligns with the action that they are doing. So always include some body language throughout the dialogue to give the reader some more context clues. Dialect. It is very hard for in dialogue you to include a lot of slang, especially if it isn't very common. And by very common, I will say that there is regional slang, there is generational slang, there is things that just may not be common to everyone, right? And as a Black author, there are things and ways that we talk. AAVE, for instance, there's ways that we speak that aren't just traditional English. It's not very straightforward, but everyone pretty much knows what you're saying. But then there's another level of nuance to that when it comes to slang because, for instance, I'm in my 30s. My daughter is in middle school. She could come home today and say something like, L Riz, I think is one of the things they're saying now. I have no idea what she's talking about. Like literally none. And I feel like I'm pretty hip and in the culture. But when she said that, I looked at her like she said abracadabra and something was supposed to appear in front of my face because I had literally had no idea what she was talking about. So imagine as a reader reading that and being like, what the hell is that? I don't know what that means. And getting very confused. And then slang has an additional nuance in that you may not actually be able to go search up that word and figure out what the actual meaning is because it has cultural context that may have nothing to do with the dictionary definition. So be very careful in using that in your writing. Not to say that you can't use everyday language that most people would understand, especially in the Black culture, but be careful of how you may include some of those words that are trendy right now in the moment, because again, a year from now, that may not even be something that people are saying anymore. Let's think of something that we may have said, 20 years ago. Like for instance, my daughter says that's bussin'. Back in the day, I might have said, "Ooh, that's the bomb," or something like that. I can't remember some of the slang words that we said that would be comparable. But imagine taking your book that you want people to read for years and years and years to pick it up and say, bussin', what the hell is that? Oh, or bussin'. We haven't said that in so long. And it immediately dates your vocabulary. So don't have a lot of your characters talking in their dialogue using a lot of slang words that may or may not date your work. Um, Also, you want your characters to sound different when they're talking. So as you're reading back your dialogue that you write, imagine that you are the different characters and think, does that character sound different from this one? And some of that is in the style that you write their dialogue. Some people may be a little bit quirkier, so they may use some flowery, fluffy jokes when they're talking, and the other person may be very serious, so their dialogue may be straight to the point and have no joke and no fluff in it. But just know that your characters should be different when they're talking in dialogue. So it doesn't seem like, not only without the context clues and without uh, the dialogue tags, someone will be able to read it and be like, oh yeah, that's two totally different characters. One way is to have your text read back to you. Word has that now where you can have it read to you, and then as you're listening, you can tell, like, does that sound like two different people, or does that just sound like one person saying that whole stream of dialogue? And you want to make sure that that's different. Another thing is, and which I have started to look for in my own writing and others' writing, is, can I tell that this is a man talking versus a woman talking? Because there is differences, right? They tend to say that men speak in shorter sentences and women have more lengthy language. They like to explain things. They like to use lots of words, lots of flowery words, where men are kind of straight, direct, and to the point. So in your language, especially if you're the opposite sex writing someone into your work, you may want to check and say, like, oh, does that sound like the opposite sex, or does that sound like a woman writing a man? And you can probably go online and see lots of examples of that where people are like, yeah, not quite. That didn't really quite hit the mark for me. And then what is another thing? Oh, your formatting. So for your dialogue formatting, make sure that it's apparent that it is a new person speaking, so that it can, chop up the text that someone is reading. It doesn't become difficult to read and understand. And also, so in reading, they know, like, besides the dialogue tags and besides the context clues, etc., and the gestures and whatever else is going on in that text, that it is new, dialogue, that it is someone else speaking. And obviously, you can look at all of the grammatical ways that you should be including dialogue with the commas, quotation marks, etc., periods, ellipses, interrupted dialogue with the long em dash that you may use. Make sure that you're using that all properly, because it can get a little confusing when you are writing dialogue if the proper grammar isn't applied. So I hope this has been helpful. One way for me is to start really listening. Sometimes when I'm writing intense dialogue, I may turn on a movie just so that I can watch people conversing and watching their body language. If you're not like me, an extreme introvert and love being in the house, you can go out into the world and experience dialogue in a coffee shop, in a store, in any of your interactions. Even take notes of what you see or encounter in other people's dialogue, some quirky things that people may do. One thing I like to do is listen in, eavesdrop on people's conversations as they're talking, and find some of the cringe things that I can use in some of my dialogue for characters that I want to be, come off a little differently. Is listening to that dialogue and that conversation between individuals out and about. Listening to different age groups, so listening to your elders, listening to the young kids that are around you, and just picking up on the ways that they talk, because it will be different. Listening to other cultures and other ethnicities and how they speak and how they converse with each other, just to pick up, see if you can find differences that will make us or yourself or your character stand out differently from others that are around them. Um, for instance, how is your character conversing with their love interest versus their homegirl or their homeboy, or how are they conversing and on a date versus if they're in the office? All of those things are nuanced in to make your character have more depth. So remember that as you are out and about and picking up on how people speak, listen for those clues that will tell you, okay, if I close my eyes right now and I listen to this person talking, are they in this setting? And you can kind of pick up on that. Are they in the office? Are they at home? Are they with their kids? That will help you identify ways that you can make their dialogue different. As always, I hope this has been helpful to you. If you have additional questions, drop them in the comments. I will be more than happy to help. Again, I am Jay Nicole. I am a Black romance author of over 45 books now, and I am here just to share some of the things that I've learned over the years. Take care until next time.